Alright, for today's lesson, we're going to be talking about the Pythagorean theorem and congruent triangles. Let's start with the Pythagorean theorem. Now, the Pythagorean theorem says that in any right triangle, where c is the hypotenuse, c squared is equal to a squared plus b squared. Now, you might also be used to seeing this as a squared plus b squared equals c squared, but the reason I'm doing it as c squared on the left, you'll see in just a moment, because we're not just going to talk about right triangles, but we're also going to talk about obtuse and acute triangles. So now if we have a triangle that's an obtuse triangle, where c is the longest side, not the hypotenuse, because the hypotenuse must be across from the 90-degree angle, which makes it a right triangle. But if we have c being the longest side, then for an obtuse triangle, c squared is going to be greater than a squared plus b squared. So remember that an obtuse triangle is a triangle that has one angle that is greater than 90 degrees. On the other hand, with an acute triangle, we have an angle that's less than 90 degrees. So I'm just lining this up so that it's a little easier to remember. With an obtuse triangle, c squared is greater than a squared plus b squared, but with an acute triangle, c squared is going to be less than a squared plus b squared. And so if you have three sides of a triangle, you'll be able to identify if it's a right triangle, an obtuse triangle, or an acute triangle. Let's take a look at example 1. Find the missing side in the right triangle below. So we see here that 7 is the hypotenuse that is across from the 90-degree angle, so we can go ahead and apply the Pythagorean theorem. So 7 squared is going to equal 5 squared plus x squared, or b squared in this case. Alright, so 49 equals 25 plus b squared. Subtract 25 from both sides, and we get b squared is equal to 24. Now we have to take the square root of both sides, and we get that b is about 4.9. It should be just under 5, since we know that the square root of 25 is equal to 5. Alright, example 2. Determine if the triangle below is a right, obtuse, or acute triangle. The diagram may not be drawn to scale. Okay, so we want to find the longest side, in this case 8, and make that c. And then we'll compare c squared with a squared plus b squared. So c is 8, so we have 8 squared, and then on the other side we have 3 squared and 6 squared. Alright, 8 squared is 64, 3 squared plus 6 squared, that's 9 plus 36. So 9 plus 36 is 45, and now we compare 64 and 45. Now we know 64 is greater than 45, which means that c squared is greater than a squared plus b squared, which means that this must be an obtuse triangle. Alright, now let's talk about congruent triangles. Now, when any figures, including triangles, are congruent, you can write a congruent statement where the order of the vertices in the first figure corresponds to the order of the vertices in the second figure. So for example, we've got two triangles here, ABC and DEF. Now, if I know that these angles here, A, B, and C, correspond directly to D, E, and F, and the sides here also correspond like so, then we can write a congruent statement, and we would say that triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF. Writing this congruent statement in this way, in that order, tells us that angle A corresponds to angle D, angle B with angle E, angle C with angle F. It also tells us that side BC corresponds to side EF, side AB corresponds to DE, and so on. Take a look at example 3. Complete each of the following, given the following congruent statement. So we're told that triangle ABC is congruent to triangle XYZ. Okay, since we have that information, now we can say, well, then BC must be congruent to YZ. And you can see that here in the diagram as well. BC corresponds to YZ. Angle Y must correspond to, well, Y is the middle letter in triangle XYZ, so it must correspond to angle B. And you'll see that in the diagram as well. YZ must correspond to BC, and angle C must correspond to angle Z. All right, the last example, write a congruent statement that indicates that the triangles are congruent. So we're told triangle DEF is congruent to, and we have a blank there, and we know it's this triangle that we have on the right here. We just need to figure out the ordering of those letters. So D corresponds to angle R, E corresponds to angle T, and F corresponds to angle S. So we would want to write that triangle DEF corresponds to triangle RTS.